The Hermit. The Hermit is one of the favourite tales of the Sufi teachers of the East, illustrating the lack of insight of the ordinary individual. A version of it by the poet Thomas Parnell was published in 1721, and the legend was regarded as his invention until 1773, though it was later thought to have come from Spain and to be an Arabian composition. It had, however, already been printed in the English translation of the medieval monkish tales, the Gesta Romanorum, in 1703, and it was thought to be Voltairean, through that philosopher's use of it in Zadig in 1748. It has been found as a popular tale in Sicily and Spain, both formerly Islamic territories, and its first appearance in literature was in the Quran, nearly 1400 years ago. In chapter 18 of the Muslim Holy Book, the account is attributed to Moses' instruction by an unknown mysterious figure, generally believed to be the apparition Khidr, later regarded as the guide of the Sufi mystics. This is Voltaire's presentation. In the reign of King Moabdar, there lived at Babylon a young man named Zadig. He was handsome, rich, and naturally good-hearted, and at the moment when this story opens, he was travelling on foot to see the world, and to learn philosophy and wisdom. But hitherto he had encountered so much misery, and endured so many terrible disasters, that he had become tempted to rebel against the will of heaven, and to believe that the providence which rules the world neglects the good, and lets the evil prosper. In this unhappy spirit he was one day walking on the banks of the Euphrates, when he chanced to meet a venerable hermit, whose snowy beard descended to his girdle, and who carried in his hand a scroll which he was reading with attention. Zadig stopped and made him a low bow. The hermit returned the salutation with an air so kindly and so noble that Zadig felt a curiosity to speak to him. He inquired what scroll was that which he was reading. "It is the Book of Destiny," replied the hermit. "Would you like to read it?" He handed it to Zadig, but the latter, though he knew a dozen languages, could not understand a word of it. His curiosity increased. "You appear to be in trouble," said the kindly hermit. "Alas," said Zadig, "I have cause to be so." "If you will allow me," said the hermit, "I will accompany you. Perhaps I may be useful to you. I am sometimes able to console the sorrowful." Zadig felt a deep respect for the appearance, the white beard, and the mysterious scroll of the old hermit, and perceived that his conversation was that of a superior mind. The old man spoke of destiny, of justice, of morality, of the chief good of life, of human frailty, of virtue and of vice, with so much power and eloquence that Zadig felt himself attracted by a kind of charm, and besought the hermit not to leave him until they should return to Babylon. "I ask you the same favour," said the hermit. "Promise me that whatever I may do, you will keep me company for several days." Zadig gave the promise, and they set forth together. That night the travellers arrived at a grand mansion. The hermit begged for food and lodging for himself and his companion. The porter, who might have been mistaken for a prince, ushered them in with a contemptuous air of welcome. The chief servant showed them the magnificent apartments, and they were then admitted to the bottom of the table, where the master of the mansion did not condescend to cast a glance at them. They were, however, served with delicacies in profusion, and after dinner washed their hands in a golden basin set with emeralds and rubies. They were then conducted for the night into a beautiful apartment, and the next morning, before they left the castle, a servant brought them each a piece of gold. "The master of the house," said Zadig, as they went their way, "appears to be a generous man, although a trifle haughty. He practices a noble hospitality." As he spoke, he perceived that a kind of large pouch which the hermit carried appeared singularly distended. Within it was the golden basin set with precious stones, which the old man had purloined. Zadig was amazed, but he said nothing. At noon the hermit stopped before a little house in which lived a wealthy miser, and once more asked for hospitality. An old valet in a shabby coat received them very rudely, showed them into the stable, and set before them a few rotten olives, some mouldy bread, and beer which had turned sour. The hermit ate and drank with as much content as he had shown the night before. Then, addressing the old valet, who had kept his eye upon them to make sure that they stole nothing, he gave him the 2 gold pieces which they had received that morning, and thanked him for his kind attention. "Be so good," he added, "as to let me see your master." The astonished valet showed them in. "Most mighty signor," said the hermit, "I can only render you my humble thanks for the noble manner in which you have received us. I beseech you to accept this golden basin as a token of my gratitude." The miser almost fell backwards with amazement. The hermit, without waiting for him to recover, set off with speed with his companion. "Holy Father," said Zadig, "what does all this mean? You seem to me to resemble other men in nothing. You steal a golden basin set with jewels from a signor who receives you with magnificence, and you give it to a curmudgeon who treats you with indignity." "My son," replied the hermit, "this mighty lord, who only welcomes travellers through vanity and to display his riches, will henceforth grow wiser, while the miser will be taught to practice hospitality. Be amazed at nothing, and follow me." Zadig knew not whether he was dealing with the most foolish or the wisest of all men. But the hermit spoke with such ascendancy that Zadig, who besides was fettered by his promise, had no choice except to follow him. That night they came to an agreeable house, of simple aspect, and showing signs of neither prodigality nor avarice. The owner was a philosopher who had left the world, and who studied peacefully the rules of virtue and of wisdom, and who yet was happy and contented. He had built this calm retreat to please himself, and he received the strangers in it with a frankness which displayed no sign of ostentation. He conducted them himself to a comfortable chamber, where he made them rest a while. Then he returned to lead them to a dainty little supper. During their conversation they agreed that the affairs of this world are not always regulated by the opinions of the wisest men. But the hermit still maintained that the ways of Providence are wrapped in mystery, and that men do wrong to pass their judgment on a universe of which they only see the smallest part. Zadig wondered how a person who committed such mad acts could reason so correctly. At length, after a conversation as agreeable as instructive, the host conducted the 2 travellers to their apartment, and thanked heaven for sending him 2 visitors so wise and virtuous. He offered them some money, but so frankly that they could not feel offended. The old man declined, and desired to say farewell, as he intended to depart for Babylon at break of day. They therefore parted on the warmest terms, and Zadig, above all, was filled with kindly feelings towards so amiable a man. When the hermit and himself were in their chamber, they spent some time in praises of their host. At break of day, the old man woke his comrade. "We must be going," he remarked, "but while everyone is still asleep, I wish to leave this worthy man a pledge of my esteem." With these words he took a torch and set the house on fire. Zadig burst forth into cries of horror, and would have stopped the frightful act. But the hermit, by superior strength, drew him away. The house was in a blaze, and the old man, who was now a good way off with his companion, looked back calmly at the burning pile. "Heaven be praised," he cried. "Our kind host's house is destroyed from top to bottom." At these words Zadig knew not whether he should burst out laughing, call the reverend father an old rascal, knock him down, or run away. But he did none of these things. Still subdued by the superior manner of the hermit, he followed him against his will to their next lodging. This was the dwelling of a good and charitable widow, who had a nephew of 14, her only hope and joy. She did her best to use the travellers well, and the next morning she bade her nephew guide them safely past a certain bridge, which, having recently been broken, had become dangerous to cross over. The youth, eager to oblige them, led the way. "Come," said the hermit when they were half across the bridge, "I must show my gratitude towards your aunt." And as he spoke, he seized the young man by the hair and threw him into the river. The youth fell, reappeared for an instant on the surface, and then was swallowed by the torrent. "Oh, monster!" exclaimed Zadig. "Oh, most detestable of men!" "You promised me more patience," interrupted the old man. "Listen. Beneath the ruins of that house which Providence saw fit to set on fire, the owner will discover an enormous treasure, while this young man, whose existence Providence cut short, would have killed his aunt within a year, and you yourself in 2. "Who told you so, barbarian?" cried Zadig. "And even if you read the issue in your book of destiny, who gave you the power to drown a youth who never injured you?" While he spoke, he saw that the old man had a beard no longer, and that his face had become fair and young. His hermit's dress had disappeared. 4 white wings covered his majestic form and shone with dazzling luster. "Angel of heaven!" cried Zadig. "You are then descended from the skies to teach an erring mortal to submit to the eternal laws." "Men," replied the angel Jezreel, "judge all things without knowledge, and you, of all men, most deserve to be enlightened. The world imagines that the youth who has just perished fell by chance into the water, and that by a like chance the rich man's house was set on fire. But there is no such thing as chance. All is trial or punishment or foresight. Feeble mortal, cease to argue and rebel against what you ought to adore." As he spoke these words, the angel took his flight to heaven, and Zadig fell upon his knees. The maiden wiser than the Tsar. Such a profusion of the traditional tales of the world are to be found in the Balkans that it has even been suggested that this area is one of the original homes of the folk tale. Hardly a genre, Slavic, Greek, Turkic, Latin, Arabian, or Jewish, is unrepresented. Through the Western European connection, the tales most often found in Germany, France, Italy are abundant. From the north are recognizable variants of the lore of the Russian and Scandinavian, as well as Mongolian traditions, and recitals from the ancient classical books are still very much in evidence. This Serbian story follows the very ancient pattern which has been called the clever girl, and in contemporary terms it may be regarded as an example of the feminine use of non-linear thinking on which contemporary problem-solving ideas are increasingly based. The tale is sometimes prefaced by the account of the girl carving a cooked fowl at a dinner where the prince is present. Nobody can understand why she apportions the pieces in the way in which she does. Instead of giving portions to the diners in accordance with their rank, she assigns them symbolically. The prince overhears her explaining the head to the head of the family, the wings for me to fly to catch a husband, and falls in love with her. This completes the symbolism of the filling of a need, where the prince represents linear thinking and needs the other form of wisdom represented by the girl. As an illustration of the respective functions of the two brain hemispheres, recently recorded by scientists, one could hardly expect a better example than this most ancient tale of Serbia. Once upon a time, there was a poor man who had one daughter. Now this girl was amazingly wise, seemed to have knowledge far beyond her years, and often said things which surprised her own father. One day, being without a penny, the poor man went to the Tsar to beg. The Tsar, astonished at the man's cultivated way of saying things, asked him where he had learned such phrases. "From my daughter," he replied. "But where was your daughter taught?" asked the Tsar. "God and our poverty have made her wise," was the answer. "Here is some money for your immediate needs," said the Tsar, "and here are 30 eggs. Command your daughter in my name to hatch them for me. If she does this successfully, you shall both have rich presents, but if she does not, you will be put to the torture." The man went home and took the eggs to his daughter. She examined them and weighed 1 or 2 in her hands. Then she realized that they were hard-boiled. So she said, "Father, wait until tomorrow. Maybe I can think what can be done about this." Next day she was up early, having thought of a solution, and boiled some beans. She gave her father a small bag of the beans and said, "Go with the plough and oxen, father, and start ploughing beside the road where the Tsar will pass on his way to church. When he puts his head out of the carriage window, call out, 'Go on, good oxen, plough the land so that these boiled beans will grow well.'" The father did as she told him, and sure enough, the Tsar put his head out of the window of his carriage to watch the man at work, and hearing what was being shouted, said, "Stupid fellow, how can you expect boiled beans to produce anything?" Primed by his daughter, the simple man called out, "Just as from boiled eggs chickens can be produced." So, laughing, the Tsar went on his way, knowing that the girl had outwitted him. But it was not to end there. The next day, the Tsar sent a courtier to the poor man with a bundle of flax, saying, "This flax must be made into sails for my ship by tomorrow. Otherwise you'll be executed." Weeping, the man went home, but his daughter said, "Have no fear, I shall think of something." In the morning she came to him and gave him a small block of wood, and said, "Tell the Tsar that if he can have all the tools necessary for spinning and weaving made out of this piece of wood, I will do the material for his sails out of the bunch of flax." He did so, and the Tsar was further impressed by the girl's answer. But he put a small glass into the man's hand and said, "Go, take this to your daughter and ask her to empty the sea with this, so that I may enlarge my dominions with precious new pastures." The man went home and gave his daughter the glass, telling her that the ruler had demanded yet another impossibility. "Go to bed," she said. "I will think of something by bringing my mind to bear upon it all night." In the morning she said, "Go to the Tsar and tell him that if he can dam up all the rivers of the world with this bundle of tow, then I will empty the sea for him." The father went back to the Tsar and told him what his daughter had said. The Tsar, seeing that she was wiser than himself, asked that she be brought to court forthwith. When she appeared, he asked her, "What is it that can be heard at the greatest distance?" Without any hesitation, she replied at once, "The thunder and the lie can be heard at the greatest distance, O Tsar." Astonished, the Tsar grasped his beard, and then, turning to his courtiers, asked, "What is my beard worth, do you think?" Each of them began to say what they thought the Tsar's beard was worth, making the value higher and higher, hoping to curry favour with his majesty. Then he said to the maiden, "And what do you think my beard is worth, my child?" Everyone looked on in amazement as she replied, "Your Majesty's beard is worth every bit as much as 3 summer rains." The Tsar, greatly astonished, said, "You have guessed rightly. I shall marry you and make you my wife this very day." So the girl became the Tsarina. But just when the wedding was over, she said to the Tsar, "I have one request to make. Be graciously pleased to write with your own hand that if you or anyone in your court be displeased with me, and I had to go away, I should be allowed to take with me any one thing which I liked best." Enamoured of the beautiful maiden, the Tsar asked for pen and parchment, and at once wrote, sealing the document with his own ruby ring, as she had requested. The years passed most happily for both of them. Then one day the Tsar had a heated argument with the Tsarina and said, "Go, I desire that you leave this palace, never to return." "I shall go tomorrow then," said the young Tsarina dutifully. "Only allow me one more night here to prepare myself for the journey home." The Tsar agreed, and she gave him his bedtime herbal drink with her usual care. No sooner had the Tsar drunk the potion than he fell asleep. The Tsarina had the Tsar carried to a coach, and they went to her father's cottage. When the morning came, the Tsar, who had spent a tranquil night, woke and looked around him in amazement. "Treason!" he roared. "Where am I, and whose prisoner?" "Mine, your Majesty," said the Tsarina sweetly. "Your parchment, written with your own hand, is here." And she showed him where he had written that if she had to leave the palace, she could take with her that which she liked best. Hearing this, the Tsar laughed heartily, and declared that his affection for her had returned. "My great love for you, O Tsar," said she, "has made me do this bold thing, but I risked death to do it, so you must see that my love is indeed very great." Then they were united, and lived happily together for the rest of their lives.